Hello, this is Rob Shaul. I'm the founder of the Mountain Tactical Institute. Welcome to the MTI podcast. Today is January 22nd, 2025. I've been suffering from some flu and fever here this last 3 days. And so I'm coming at you with a raspy voice. But one of the benefits is I couldn't do much, so I would just pay attention to the news and all the changes that have occurred since President Trump took office on the 20th, and a lot of the changes that he's done via executive orders will have some pretty significant impacts on all the athletes in the MTI community, tactical athletes, the U.S. military, all the federal and state and local law enforcement agencies, and even on the mountain side, many of our mountain athletes and mountain professionals. So today I just want to focus on some of the things that he did, the executive officer changes, order changes, that could have a significant impact on the athletes that we work with. The first, just kind of going back to something I've covered in the past, is Trump's position towards NATO. Recently, I mentioned this last week, he has suggested that NATO allies pick up and start spending 5% of their GDP on their defense. Currently, the NATO standard is 2%, and I think like 23 of 32 NATO nations have do 2%. Importantly, Canada isn't one of those. I think Canada does 1% of its GDP towards defense. Anyway, based on this article and other opinion and news articles I've read here this last 3 days, the NATO countries have saw this coming. There is some concern that with the shift in U.S. defense posture towards China and towards Pacific, the result might be a decrease in American presence in Europe, specifically troop deployments. We have bases all over Europe, thousands of troops, stationed in Germany, for example. So one of the articles has suggested there might be a troop reduction in Europe of up to 50,000 U.S. Army troops. They'd be redeployed to the U.S. or perhaps, taken out to the Pacific someplace. Also, some discussion that the U.S. might move its European headquarters to Poland. Poland is one of the countries that is punching above its weight in terms of its army and defense spending. And I have read, although I need to look this up, that Poland has like the biggest army in Europe right now from all the NATO allies, despite its relatively small population size compared to Germany and Britain and others. So it seems that Poland, Finland, Sweden, the Baltic countries, and the Eastern European NATO countries are taking the threat from Russia most serious and are spooling up their defense in accordance. And that seems to please, President Trump and his appointees to the Defense Department and the foreign policy establishment. Anyways, this could be a significant shift in terms of our defense posture, especially if there comes an end to the Ukrainian war. And I spoke about this last week. Russia is suspected of having suffered 600,000 casualties in that war to around 50,000 or so from Ukraine. It's definitely taken a bite out of Russia, and it seems that there's certainly incentives for both sides to end that war. We'll see if President Trump can fulfill his campaign promise and bring it to an end. If that war did end, there could be a decrease in tensions in Europe that, in addition to an increase in spending, one of the news articles I did read this week was that Macron, the president of France, has pushed for an increase in NATO spending by the NATO European partners based on the idea that Trump is going to be pulling back from the U.S. presence. So all those things occurring could result in the reduction in the troop deployments, U.S. troop deployments to Europe, and shifting that either back, eliminating those positions for budget reasons, or shifting them to the Pacific. Obviously, that'll impact all of our guys in the military. Um, there was a story in Foreign Policy titled Why Trump's Greenland, Canada, Panama Comments Are Dangerous. Again, this is coming from the Foreign Policy magazine. It kind of comes from the establishment think tank, national security leadership there in D.C. And this is kind of a hit back on Trump's interest in attaining Greenland, taking over the Panama Canal again, and what he's mentioned towards Canada, half jokingly, I'm making him a 51st state, and then also the possibility of tariffs in Canada. I did see today news report that he is plans on implementing tariffs February 1st, which is just 10 days down the road or less, a week ahead, on Canada and Mexico, over border issues and fentanyl coming across the border. So I guess what is interesting about this article in the Foreign Policy magazine is its reactionary, predictable reaction to Trump's comments on these issues, and perhaps missing the bigger picture, that there's been a shift in U.S. policy that started with his first term, away from Europe towards China as a threat, a foreign policy threat, and more recently here with his second term, emphasis on protecting the Western Hemisphere and reinvigorating the Monroe Doctrine. So we'll see if all these things come to pass. This is part of making the deal for President Trump in terms of putting out a statement as an initial position and then wanting something in between. So we'll see where this occurs. But again, just the traditional foreign policy establishment reaction is kind of what you would expect. And it seems that I'm not sure that the foreign policy establishment in Washington has reacted to Trump yet in the new reality. It could be that nothing changes over the years, but I guess we're going to see. Again, this is another story. I can't remember what publication is. The article, is it Stars and Stripes? The article is titled "Less Military Involvement in Europe, Dominant China Focus Likely if Trump Wins." This is published on January 22nd, so it was after he won. I guess if he wins, his policy changes. Again, it mentioned the increase 5% spending for GDP. This hasn't been put out officially yet, but that's what he's called for or suggested. The article touches on repurposing troops currently involved in European missions for operations against China. Again, this is redeployment of troops from Europe to the U.S. or to somewhere in the Pacific. And it's just a significant policy shift in U.S. defense strategy. Border stuff, the executive orders that Trump has made on border and immigration. Most of you are familiar with this. But this impacts our guys. This is or our athletes. This is a title, article on CNN from yesterday or today, actually. U.S. military ordering thousands of troops to the southern border. Currently, there are about 2,500 U.S. troops, National Guard members already on the border. And I did see where Trump had ordered the Northern Command to send more troops to the border in support of, or secure the border, but also in support of the Homeland Security efforts to deport immigrants. My understanding is that there's a possibility that U.S. bases will be used to house immigrants who are rounded up by the Homeland Security agencies and then deported somewhere to South America or Mexico, and that military aircraft might be used to do that. How all of this is going to occur or happen, no one knows for sure. I do know, for example, that we have a base in Honduras, so it's possible that say thousands of immigrants were rounded up, sent to a base in Texas, a military base, and then flown from that base to our base in Honduras and shifted outside the gate in Honduras. Who knows if that's going to occur, but it's possible. And the other idea that troops will be put on the border to secure the border, who knows what that means. Of course, there's laws against U.S. military being used to enforce domestic U.S. law. The question is whether or not immigrants coming across the border are violating U.S. law or if it's a national security issue. This might be taken up in the courts, probably will be. But the idea that U.S. troops will be on the border, I think, is a given. And who knows what might happen, accidental or something, as a response to that. There was also a story that I saw, and I can't remember what it was. It was, here it is, in intelnews.org, and this story, again on the border, is Trump signaling possible CIA covert operations against drug cartels. This is published yesterday, January 21st, and it just notes that Trump has issued executive orders aimed at combating drug trafficking with specific mentions about potential lethal actions against cartels. He has designated the cartels as domestic or as terrorist organizations. And he has said that we're gonna go after cartels like we've never done before. And this has fueled speculation about CIA involvement. And the article pointed to some historic CIA involvement against drug cartels. And anyway, there's some history of in the 1980s and 90s where CIA supported or conducted operations against drug lords in South America, which is interesting. So there could be some covert stuff, some intelligence gathering, and the idea that the CIA would gather the intelligence, and then the military would have a supporting role in terms of special forces raids on drug cartels or leadership or whatever. I guess the way you kind of follow this through, for example, the CIA gets intelligence, whether it's human intelligence on the ground or through other resources, on the leadership of the Sinaloa cartel in northern Mexico, and it results in a special forces raid, killing leadership in Mexico someplace. And that would involve, of course, U.S. military hit on a cartel member in a foreign country, and then all the issues that surround that. Of course, we've done this before, most notably the Osama bin Laden raid. He was in Pakistan when we hit him, and we didn't let the Pakistanis know. And so this has happened all over the Middle East, and I'm sure maybe it's likely happened in South America, also in the 1980s and 90s. Who knows what the agencies were used to do that. Perhaps federal law enforcement agencies, like DEA Fast Team or something like that. The ratcheting up here is that, as promised, and we discussed before, Trump has designated the cartels as terrorist organizations, which allows U.S. military action against them, and use of the other national security apparatus, including the CIA, against him. So who knows how this will develop, but it could impact all of the tactical athletes, military, especially federal law enforcement, DEA, Homeland Security agencies, FBI, all the special forces teams on that side, U.S. Marshals, Border Patrol, BORTAC, BORSTAR, all those athletes. So more stuff on the border. ICE arrests. So on yesterday, the 21st, ICE made over 300 arrests of illegal aliens in the nation's interior. I guess these are targeted arrests against known criminals who were also immigrants. And the idea, and also there's also been a significant reduction in immigrants crossing the border. Just 766 immigrants were arrested for crossing the border illegally over the first few days of the Trump administration, significantly down from the few days before. I'd seen one note of 12,000 were arrested in a few days before he became president or took the inauguration. So anyway, it seems like there's some deterrence effect of Trump's presidency for sure. But we do know now that ICE and Border Patrol agents are in the U.S. rounding up, it sounds like, illegal immigrants with criminal records. Of course, this impacts the local law enforcement in those states. And there's another article along this lines. This is in, I can't remember the publication. Oh, it's in Police One, which is a website that covers domestic police agencies in the U.S. The article is titled DOJ Directs Prosecutors to Probe Local Efforts to Obstruct Immigration Enforcement. So some states and locales have policies in place to obstruct immigration enforcement within their jurisdictions. In other words, for example, the mayor of New York, for example, notifies his police department not to work with ICE coming in to arrest illegal immigrants in New York City. What is important about this is Trump administration officials have said that if local elected officials obstruct their efforts to round up illegal aliens, that those local officials could be prosecuted. And I think that's what this is getting at. The Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Justice, has attorneys and prosecutors that may be looking at this. So it's possible perhaps that mayors and governors and other local officials who come out officially against this federal law change now could be prosecuted. That'll be really interesting to see if this does occur. This memo cites potential charges like conspiracy to obstruct federal functions or harboring officials in the country illegally, indicating that local officials could face criminal prosecution if found to be hindering federal immigration enforcement. So that is just really interesting, especially the idea of sanctuary cities and communities. Perhaps one of the most unanticipated things that happened yesterday was the commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard was fired. Admiral, this is from the USNI, which is the United States, the U.S. Naval Institute News. The headline is titled, Admiral Linda Fagan removed as Coast Guard Commandant. This happened yesterday. I had heard and had spoken previously about some changes that the potential Defense Department designee, the Defense Department designee for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has said about removing admirals and flag generals and other flag officers who really pushed DEI in the defense industry or Defense Department if he ever became Defense Secretary. I hadn't seen anything mention the Coast Guard prior to this firing yesterday. And so this firing was unexpected. As an old, if you don't know, I used to be in the Coast Guard years ago. I went to the academy and was a Coast Guard junior officer. So the article reports unexpected dismissal of Admiral Linda Fagan from her position as Commandant of the Coast Guard. I think she's been in the Coast Guard Commandant for 2 years, making one of the first significant personnel changes by the newly inaugurated Trump administration. Reasons for removal, leadership and policy disputes. Official statements in the Department of Homeland Security cited leadership deficiencies, operational failures, and inability to advance strategic objectives of the U.S. Coast Guard. Her approach to border security, recruitment challenges, and handling of diversity DEI initiatives, which are perceived by some in the new administration as core operational goals. I did read one story concerning this, that 40% of the Coast Guard Academy cadets right now are female. And that would be a significant increase over when I was there. I think it was just 10% when I was there. In my understanding, it's been historically around 10% for all the academies. I don't know if that's true or not. I'd have to look that up, I guess. But that's just interesting. Border security. The article mentions concern about Fagan's management of Coast Guard operations concerning border security, including not sufficiently addressing threats like drug trafficking or illegal immigration. Fagan's tenure saw recruitment numbers not meeting expectations, and there were issues with retention, impacting the service's operational capacity. There were mixed responses. There was a divided response. Some praised the move as reset needed for the Coast Guard to focus on core missions, while others, including some Democrats, condemned it as an unjust dismissal of a trailblazing female leader, potentially undermining morale and continuity of the service. Importantly, Admiral Fagan was the first female head of a defense service or armed service, I guess, in the U.S. military. The Coast Guard is under the Department of Homeland Security, but is considered an armed service. So this was caught everybody by surprise, including me. I didn't know that she was considered there. However, this story in the Washington Post today, Coast Guard orders forces to Gulf of America after Admiral ousted. Following the abrupt dismissal of Admiral Fagan as a commandant, the service announced the deployment of additional resources to what it refers to as the Gulf of America, the new name for the Gulf of Mexico, as per executive order by Donald Trump. So it sounds like the Coast Guard is sending more ships and forces south to enforce immigration and drug enforcement. The new commandant is Admiral Kevin Lunde. He was the vice commandant prior. There's expectation of a leadership style more aligned with Trump's security priorities. Lunde's statement emphasizes the Coast Guard's role as the world's premier maritime law enforcement agency. So the article concludes by framing these developments as part of a larger narrative where Trump's administration is redefining U.S. maritime and border security policies, with the Coast Guard's operations being a key component of this shift. So it sounds like this was acted on really quickly by the Coast Guard. I'm not too sure if Admiral Lunde had been speaking to Trump administration officials prior or not, but he's executing. It'll be interesting to see if he stays on as a commandant of the Coast Guard. Concerning other changes that Trump has made, one of the issues or the change the executive orders did was to reinstate, I think there are about 8,000 U.S. military people who were discharged for refusing to take the COVID vaccine during the COVID pandemic. And if I understand correctly, he reinstated those individuals, including back pay. So that's one thing that came out of that. Another area where the Trump's executive orders will impact MTI athletes is on the mountainside. And a couple of specifics here. One is his drill baby drill executive order changes and how that it could increase oil and gas development in federal lands in the West. And another is he signed an executive order to increase oil and gas development in Alaska. And then also he renamed Denali to Mount McKinley. So this is an article in Gear Junkie titled "Alaska is Unleashed. Trump lifts sweeping wilderness protections, renames Mount McKinley." This is published yesterday. Mount McKinley was changed to Denali in 2008 by President Obama, I guess, to respect what Native Americans up there had called Mount McKinley prior. And so Trump has made that change about to Mount McKinley. I think Obama probably did it the executive order, and Trump just changed the order and wrote his own. But concerning the oil and gas development, opening ANWR for oil and gas, reversing Biden's halt on oil and gas exploration in Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, veiling development of areas previously protected, the Amblin Road Project, starting an Amblin Road Project. This would create a 200-mile road through Alaskan wilderness, opening up mining opportunities, logging in the Tongass National Forest, repealing the roadless rule to permit logging in the Tongass, one of the world's largest temperate rainforests, increase hunting and trapping, reviving the 2020 rule that allows more liberal hunting and trapping on federal lands versus practices previously restricted. One of the things that also has mentioned was that Biden had implemented a lease ban, oil and gas lease ban on BLM and other federal lands in the West when he became president. And my understanding is that Trump has taken this ban away. You may wonder how this impacts MTI athletes, but on the mountainside, especially in the West, federal land management is everything. Most of the outdoor activities occur on federal lands, and changes in federal land management affects mountain sports. And I come at this from outdoor athlete, a mountain athlete, kind of all around mountain athlete, but also as a hunter. And just for example, the increase in oil and gas development in forests can negatively impact hunting because more roads mean more people, and the wildlife, big game specifically, get pushed out of those areas. So it's just one of those things that has impacts that you don't really realize unless you're on the ground living it. One of the interesting things that's occurred in the West, especially in popular areas like Jackson, where I live, is the shift of impacts to wildlife and to the land, not from industry like oil and gas, but from tourism. And I spoke about this a while ago, but there's controversy in the Tetons there near Jackson about backcountry skiing and protecting big game, specifically big game, bighorn sheep in the Teton Range. And the Forest Service had proposed some restrictions on backcountry skiing, and the changes were opposed by backcountry skiers and guiding companies in Jackson, who you would usually think would be for wildlife. Anyway, these issues are complicated, and so these changes could be opposed by people who you might most likely be in favor of Trump's policies. If you look at the vote of the Western states for Trump versus Biden, I don't think any of them went for Biden, except California and Washington, Oregon. The interior West, Wyoming, Colorado. I think Colorado did go, I think, for Biden. Maybe not. But Montana, Utah, at least the ones surrounding Wyoming, overwhelmingly voted for Trump. And so there could be a conflict between some of those people who supported his policies in one area but don't support this one. Anyway, it's just something that impacts athletes for sure, as it can impact how they recreate with the increase in oil and gas development. The other interesting element of that oil and gas development in terms of Trump's work there is, I assume there's going to be more rules coming out which decrease the regulation on nuclear development, and nuclear power plants would be in direct competition with especially natural gas drilling, because natural gas is used to produce electricity, and more nuclear energy be used to produce electricity also. So my understanding is Trump is in favor of all types of energy production in the U.S., but you could see these two industries, in conflict. So, for example, it might be a case where oil and gas industry would oppose nuclear development because of the impacts to its industry on producing electricity. I don't mean to get in the weeds there, but it's just interesting how all this stuff could play out here in this next few years. Another issue that's kind of over the top of all this that's occurring with these changes is the national debt and the budget in the U.S. and Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. So the overall goal, I think, that they have stated so far is that, and I think they want to deliver the report from this Department of Government Efficiency within 18 months, if not sooner. And they're looking like at a huge reduction in the federal workforce, like 50 to up to 95% for different agencies. Anyway, for some agencies, this could be elimination of most of the people. All of that would impact, especially, for example, if it was the federal agencies which manage the BLM, the Forest Service. A reduction in people could obviously impact outdoor activities in those areas or those lands. And also the reduction, there's going to have to be some reduction in defense spending. I expect that. A reduction in staffing, maybe where most of that comes from. But those are areas I think that are part of the Trump's mandate, and we just can't avoid as a country, I don't think, unless we really grow the economy. So some of the things that he may want to do may be curtailed or cut back because of just the realities of the budget and the financial situation in the U.S. So more to follow, I think, on that, where those could impact some of his other plans. So I think that's about it. There's just been so much news here recently that could impact the athletes at MTI in our community, especially, I think, in the short term with the border changes and how that is impacting law enforcement at all levels. The military more and more with military involvement, the naming of drug cartels as terrorist organizations, which could spin up the national security apparatus and defense department in fighting these organizations, and how all that might play out here over these next few years. I did see another article, again, which is really interesting. Trump is a lame dunk president because he only has 4 years to serve. And historically, for presidents, that's about, so if historically presidents that are elected twice back to back, the first 2 years of their term is where they're able to get, their second term is when they're able to get stuff done. And then the last 2 years, because they're lame ducks, they are not able to get as much stuff done. And I read an article which suggested that this time of 2 years might even be shorter for President Trump because we all know that he is going to be on his way out here after this term. These changes have become fast as he promised in his campaign, and it'll be interesting to see how the court and the lawsuits and the courts prevent some of his initiatives. For example, he did change the interpretation of birthright citizenship, and that's already been, there have been lawsuits filed about that. I read today where like 19 states have filed lawsuits about his changes to birthright citizenship. So all this is going to get worked through the court. Usually the way that occurs is the court takes it up, there's a stay on the order, and so the change doesn't occur until it's already worked up through the Supreme Court in some cases. So all this initial activity could be cut back significantly with court challenges. I think from the past week, the most surprising thing for me was the firing of Admiral Kagan from the Coast Guard. That was really not predicted, and I hadn't read about that prior to he was coming on anywhere. So I think that's a significant change, and it'd be interesting to talk to people in the Coast Guard. I didn't really have any knowledge of what Coast Guard members thought about Admiral Kagan prior. I just haven't seen anything, so at least published. Anyway, that's it for this week. I hope I get better, and have a great week, and more to follow next week. Again, thanks for listening. If you have any questions or concerns or suggestions, email me, rob@mtntactical.com. Thanks.